This hearing occurred in the United Kingdom, but the legal issues can be compared to the regulation of Queensland paramedics. In this situation, Queensland paramedics would have contravened Section 18A subsection B of the Ambulance Service Act 1991, Section 6 of the Public Sector Ethics Act 1994, as well as the Australasian Paramedics Code of Conduct. The major legal complications of this case relating to Queensland law are due to taking advantage of a vulnerable patient through suggestive conversations and the misuse of ambulance resources. This unethical behaviour displays disrespect for the profession and degrades the public's trust towards the integrity of the service, ultimately tarnishing the Queensland Ambulance Service's reputation. In 2016, English paramedic Mr. Lee Parkin engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a former patient. This interaction included sending the patient greeting cards, exchanging suggestive text messages, and using the ambulance to transport the patient without clinical reason to purchase alcohol. Mr. Parkin's inappropriate relationship was exposed to other paramedics when they were called to the residence of the patient in mid-2016. The patient asked responders if they knew a paramedic named Lee and showed them a greeting card signed with his name. One of the paramedics recognized the handwriting and escalated the issue within the EMAS. In subsequent visits to the patient's residence, paramedics found that Mr. Parkin had twice transported her in the ambulance to purchase alcohol and a rug from IKEA. Throughout the hearing, it was proven that Mr. Parkin had asked the patient not to show or tell anyone from the ambulance service regarding their relationship, using words to the effect of, "Please do not show this to others." This panel had no evidence that Mr. Parkin had a sexual motivation, and during his EMAS interview, he also denied sexual motivation. However, Mr. Parkin's actions of engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a patient constitutes as misconduct, and he was suspended from the EMAS after nearly 2 decades of employment. Inappropriate interactions with patients, as seen in this case, do not have any specific prohibitions in Queensland law. However, there are disciplinary actions associated with misconduct, as described in Section 18A of the Ambulance Service Act of 1991. This misconduct may be defined as inappropriate or improper conduct whilst in an official capacity and/or inappropriate conduct in a private capacity that will reflect poorly on the ambulance service. As a practitioner, Mr. Parkin chose to impede his professional boundaries by manipulating his patient and initiating a close personal relationship. This misconduct is proven by a power imbalance and impaired his capability to perform professional duties through the private transport and sending multiple inappropriate messages. The Public Sector Ethics Act of 1994 also mentions the integrity and impartiality that must be upheld to promote public confidence and reliability in the public sector. Division 2 states that public service agencies must be committed to honest, fair, and respectful engagement in the community and are committed to using public resources in an accountable way. Mr. Parkin, in this case, was clearly not upholding these values and responsibilities through his deception of his colleagues and the mistreatment of resources he was entrusted with. These resources should have been available to those in the community who were sick and injured, proving his irresponsibility of the resources he was entrusted with. Queensland law demonstrates that Mr. Parkin's actions were unprofessional under Section 18A of the Ambulance Service Act of 1991. He has shown improper conduct in a private capacity that reflects seriously and adversely on the ambulance service. This means that although his actions involved the officer's private life, he crossed professional boundaries that has serious effects on the reputation of the ambulance service. Parkin also violated under Section 13 of the National Code of Conduct for Healthcare Workers by engaging in sexual misconduct with a patient. It is believed that he expressed sexual and erotic comments such as repeated requests to go out and sexually explicit text messages and calls. This code was designed to provide a set minimum for those professions that were unregistered. The Code of Conduct states that disciplinary actions can be taken and registered professionals can be deregistered. Division 2, Section 6 through 9 of the Public Sector Ethics 1994 outlines the responsibility of public service agencies, including that of the QAS. This includes following the values of public interest and commitment to using public resources in an effective and accountable way. Mr. Parkin did not demonstrate this as the ambulance vehicle was used for purposes other than the intended. It is also outlined that public sector ethics should be committed to the highest ethical standards. That was not evidenced in this case. Parkin also failed to demonstrate utilitarian ethics by using the ambulance for personal services and removing himself from duty. he failed to provide the greatest good for the greater number of people. He didn't support the community and instead focused on himself and the patient whom he had a relationship with. Although there have been very few reported cases under the QAS, there have been previous cases of sexual and ethical misconduct. This includes the case of a former OIC of Air Station, who was found to be acting in misconduct towards a graduate paramedic. They were sending lewd text messages and comments similar to the case in the UK, which heavily contributed to his termination of employment. Considering the facts of this case, as well as the laws of Queensland jurisdiction, the outcome of the case would have been much the same, the exception being that paramedics were not a registered profession, unlike in the UK. However, paramedicine is becoming a registered profession, and the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency has determined a code of conduct to be followed. APFRA outlines under Section 8, subsection 2, that sexual and personal relationships with a former patient is inappropriate. Furthermore, the patient was vulnerable due to drug and alcohol abuse. This code dictates that breaches can result in deregistration. Lee Parkin would have been suspended from QAS, possibly terminated, and his certificate of practice by the QAS removed. Mr. Parkin did not uphold professional standards of conduct or professional ethics in accordance with the Healthcare Professional Tribunal Service 2016. It is a paramedic's responsibility to protect the interest of service users and keep relationships with the service users professional. In failing to uphold these standards, Mr. Parkin was rightfully suspended from working in the ambulance service. Mr. Parkin was working outside of the Ambulances Service Act and knowingly carried out a relationship. Therefore, his suspension from EMAS was legally and ethically warranted.